You found us through fly fishing. You'll stay for our passion and the community. Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Podcast.
Yeah, but he doesn't get it. How come fly fishermen don't get it?
You only haul with the short power snap.
Look for where people walk and the insides of bends and hunt those.
The roof blew off and the interior walls got sucked out. And the trees are just coming up. And I mean, he's clearly not going to clear the trees.
It is not a fly fishing story. It's a story about me trying to understand my brother through fly fishing.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today.
We've been waiting for you. Follow our guests, follow us on Instagram, and share this episode and the love if you enjoy this podcast. And we are live in 3, 2, 1. How you doing, Peter?
Doing great.
Great. Glad to have you on here. Like most of our episodes now, we start these from, a lot of times from listeners or guests who have recommended, people to come on the podcast. And that's how we found you. You've got a lifelong, work in writing, New York Times, Field and Stream, lots of stuff out there. We're going to talk about that today. And I want to hear how you got the New York Times came to be. But let's start with fly fishing. First, take us back. How'd you get into it? What's your first memory of fly fishing?
Well, I guess it was 1974 or 75. I was working at National Lampoon, which was a madhouse in the 70s. A lot of drinking, a lot of other stuff. And so I wanted to just get away from it all and took a vacation on the recommendation of one of the other editors there to the Yucatan. And we went to a place that even back in those days looked a little too, Club Med or Carnival Cruisy to me. So we drove south and went past the pyramid of Tulum, which was a pyramid and a taco stand in those days, and drove down this road. It said Boca Paila, mouth of the kettle, and ended up at this Boca Paila fishing camp. And we went in. They made us lunch. It was terrific. And there was a bunch of fly fishermen there. I'd never seen fly fishing. So we stayed there. I was spin fishing at the time, caught some permit, caught some bonefish on shrimp. But the real thing was I saw these guys casting, and I thought it was like the greatest thing I'd ever seen. So I came back to New York City, ran into some friends who fly fished. Jeff Norman, who was an editor at Esquire at the time, was a great fly fisherman.
Yeah. And
we went up to the Catskills. And on that first trip, I saw this guy with a great cast catching fish in an impossible place, and it turned out to be Doug Swisher. For those who don't know him, he was a great influence in casting and fly tying in those days. And he was giving a clinic. So I took the clinic for 2 days. I recommend everybody takes the clinic or start out with a teacher because it's proved invaluable. If for no other reason, I learned the reach cast then, which for fly fishing is the best.
It is.
The bug got me. And Lampoon started to get a little old for me. And anyway, I got fired, as everyone does some point. So I started to write for the outdoor magazines. It was really lucky that I found my way into it. It was Outdoor Life. Had a really wild fellow at the time at the head. His name was John Madison Culler. And he'd won a lot of awards editing South Carolina Wildlife magazine. And so he was kind of new to the big time and the big three media. And he sort of liked having someone different like me. And so I started to write for him. Field and Stream came along, Sports Afield. I wrote for all of them. And I got to know Nick Lyons a little bit through my work. And so sometime late, maybe it's 1980, 81, Nelson Bryant was the New York Times outdoors columnist at the time. And he was cutting back, and it was a 3 times a week column. And they had asked Nick to write it. I don't know if your readers remember, Nick wrote the seasonable angler page, the last page of Fly Fisherman, which was a Bible for all of us, or a psalm. And Nick had a full plate at the time. He was also a professor, so he recommended me. And that was the beginning of a really wonderful experience. The Times pretty much let me write what I wanted. They didn't, edit it too much. And when they did, they made it better. And I just love doing it.
Wow. Well, that's that's a lot to pack in there. The New York Times, Nick Lyons. I love how getting started. You mentioned the fly fishing clinic. I'm curious on the clinic. What was that? Was that like a 2-day clinic? We've been doing some of our own clinics in schools, and I agree with you. I think it's really important. What was that first clinic like?
Well, basically, we cast a lot on the lawn.
Yeah.
We had to put like a handkerchief or a bandana down, like 30, 40 feet away and hit it. And he was just very good. I mean, Doug, of course, could throw the whole line, but
Yep.
I learned how to cast. I'm still learning how to cast. I learned about the double hole. Like I said, the reach cast, and a few others, a curve cast. But basically, it was the basic fly cast and basic back cast. And he had more of a Western style. By that, I mean, it wasn't the straight up and down with the book under your arm. It was a more kind of open, arm, kind of like Lefty Cray as well.
Oh, right. A little bit more open. And so that was, so that clinic was Doug Swisher basically on the lawn. You guys weren't on the water. Was it kind of all like a day session on the lawn?
Well, no, I think we did a half day on the water.
Okay. There you go. Half day on the water with Doug Swisher. That's pretty, yeah. He's one of the, I guess it was Swisher and Richards. Was that the book?
That's right.
Yeah.
I think the book was Selective Trout.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll get a link in the show notes to that book. And so people
And
can
how flies come in and out of fashion. So at that point in time, Doug really liked the Matuka, which is a streamer, sort of with a hackle palmered through the length of a flank feather.
Right. And a big head, like a big, like a Matuka sculpin sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. And what was so National Lampoons? When I hear National Lampoon, I think of like Chevy Chase and the National, the Lampoon sort of, movie. Is that a connection? Is that the same thing?
Well, yeah, the Lampoon at the time, we also had a radio show, a radio hour, and the cast on the radio hour included Bill Murray.
Oh, wow.
John Belushi, Gilda Radner, Brian Doyle Murray, Paul Schaefer.
Yeah, of course. David Letterman.
And we all used to hang together. We had this editor's lounge, one much of a lounge. There was a couple of chairs.
So you hung out with Bill Murray and the crew?
Oh, yeah.
What was that like, hanging out with Bill Murray and those folks?
He was a nice guy. Remember him sitting around the lounge. He used to, in the wintertime, somehow, for some reason, he used to put his coat on backwards, or like use it, just put it over his shoulders, but backwards, so it covered his front.
Oh, right.
And we all liked baseball. Well, I guess Belushi and Gilda and Bill all came out of Second City in Chicago. And it was basically, we just try to make each other laugh all day. We also try to find one person who was feeling particularly vulnerable that day, and we'd all pile on. That was a great sport there. And then we'd go about 4:00 in the afternoon to this Japanese restaurant around the corner, the Robata, and we would drink.
Yep.
I discovered there's no upper limit to how many martinis a young man can put away.
Right. Wow. So this was, and of course, I think like Belushi, he's got I think he died because of drug. I mean, a lot of people took it to the extreme on that stuff. What kept you out of going down that road or maybe you did go down the extreme road, but you hear about some of these crazy stories with people that passed away from going too far.
John did what was called a speedball, I think an injected heroin cocktail, and that's what got him. Doug Kenny, who was one of the founding editors who wrote Animal House, for example, he fell off a cliff in Miami, in Hawaii. So I was just into your garden, smoking weed, having cocktails. Cocaine sort of came in towards the end of my tenure there, and we all thought it made us smarter, which it didn't.
No.
And that was the whole deal.
Right. So you survived the National Lampoon period. So basically, you were a writer there. So you wrote for like some of the what were the publications that came out of that?
The main one was National Lampoon. I was an editor. I was also the managing editor for a year. Most of the magazine was put out. It was written by 8 people. We used to sit around and talk. We'd spend more time picking the cover than writing stories in the magazine. And I would say I was a good AAA writer. We had some real major leaguers there. And so that was that.
Wow.
We made some great lifelong friends.
Today's episode is sponsored by Daiichi Fishing Hooks, a leader in the fly fishing industry and still the world's sharpest hook. Tempered with carbon-rich steel, Daiichi offers superior penetration without compromising the hook's structural integrity. You can head over right now to wetflyswing.com/Daiichi and check out what they have going and check out these killer hooks. That's Daiichi, Daiichi. Do you still hear from any of, I guess some of those people are still out there. Do you have any connection to Bill Murray or any of those folks from the Lampoon days?
Well, Bill, I lost touch with Bill after he became a big star in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And what happened a few years, my brother and I created a show called the Mark Twain Prize for American Humor at the Kennedy Center. And we produced that for 20 years. And I think maybe it was 2017, we honored Bill. So I saw him a bunch then, and he was the same Bill Murray. And his brother Brian was there, and Jane Curtin showed up. It was a pretty terrific show.
Wow. So you made that change you mentioned from National Lampoon getting fired there and then going over into so basically the New York Times was the next big gig. And when you went to the New York Times, did you start writing mostly outdoor, or was a lot of different things?
No, well, it was a few years till I got the Times because it took a while to get known. Writing for the big 3 at the time: Sports Afield, Field and Stream, Outdoor Life. And that's how Nick found me. And that's how I got to the Times. So the first stuff I wrote for the Times was outdoors. It was a mix of fishing and hunting. But I wasn't that much of a hunter. Never shot a deer, largely because the few times I went, I got buck fever when I had a deer in my sights. I enjoyed grouse hunting, woodcock, waterfowl, but I also discovered there was amazing saltwater fly fishing in the Northeast and in New York Harbor. I'm a better fly caster than I am a wing shot. So after a few years, I only wrote about fishing, and I'd say 90% of it was fly fishing. And while writing for the Times, the outdoors column, I always put some food in the story. Was I found that even if it's a Snickers bar, food in a story leaps off the page like your own name. One year I did a series for the Times called A Season on the Harbor. And every month I fished in another place in New York City waters and wrote a little bit about the history of it and the fishery there. And so the last story of the year, I was having Christmas lunch with my college roommate, which we did every year. And I knew Michael Lamonaco. He was the chef at 21 Club, a pretty famous ritzy place at the time. I didn't know him because I wasn't in the food business. I knew him through fishing, through a mutual friend. He knew I was a fisherman. I recommended some tackle so he could take his son fishing. So anyway, the December column, I took my daughter black fishing, tautog fishing on a party boat out of Sheepshead Bay in Brooklyn. We caught a mess of blackfish. And I wrote to Michael and I said, I want to have lunch with my roommate and I can bring you all these blackfish. You can cook us some and sell the rest. And he said, sure. So I showed up at the 21 Club. I'm waiting to check in. I have my little igloo cooler with the fillets in it. And standing behind me is Frank Gifford, the football great.
Oh, yeah.
And having lunch with Ethel Kennedy. I mean, go figure.
Oh, Ethel Kennedy, the mother of John F. Kennedy and those.
No, she
No.
was the wife of Robert Kennedy.
Oh, okay.
And anyway, Frank Gifford said, did you bring your lunch? I said, as a matter of fact, I did. And we got to talking. It turned out he was a striper fisherman in Connecticut. So we had lunch. I wrote a story, and I had a picture of the great fisherman on the party boat. His name was Eddie Dulles, and he worked as the walrus keeper at the Coney Island Aquarium. And then had some pictures of Michael in the kitchen shaking pans, looking very top chefy. And the Times gave me, maybe 2/3 of a page for that. And I got so much of a response, I said I should write about food too. So I started writing about food, done many cookbooks in the years since, written for Food and Wine, Condé Nast Traveler, and so on. And I wrote many more outdoors columns and food columns in the Times, but I've written a number of them over the years. I edited a book on grilling for the Times. And so I became a food writer as well as an outdoor writer.
Right. Yeah, that is amazing. And you mentioned food leaping off the page like your name does. Well, why does food leap off the page? Is it because everybody loves kind of eating and everybody does it, or why is that?
Exactly.
Yeah. Everybody's struggling. I mean, I can tell you, last night I grilled up some steaks, and I'm probably maybe one of the worst cooks out there. I'm pretty good camping because when you're camping, everything tastes good. But I think a lot of people struggle with cooking. Do you find that too? That like when you wrote these pieces with food, did you go really basic? Did you kind of do basic everything in between, or how did that look?
I covered the whole spectrum. I tend to go more elemental, but I've learned tricks of the trade from some of the world's great chefs. Your listeners may know, I guess maybe the most famous book I have done that sort of overlaps into outdoors is I did 7 Fires with Francis Mallmann. And he became a big star. He's a wood fire cook. He became a big star on Netflix. I did a book on tailgating with John Madden, Coach John Madden. A book that I really, really love. It's a few years ago. I did it with a guy named Ned Baldwin. The book's called How to Dress an Egg. And it's about a lot more than eggs. And he's just a real great natural born chef who, earned his bones in some great restaurants. He's learned how to take things that people love to do in the home and find ways just to get the most flavor with the least fuss out of them. His roast chicken, everybody who's made that roast chicken, I mean, everybody has told me they'll never do it another way.
Oh, wow. That's great.
I published a number of the fish recipes in Flylords.
Oh, yeah.
Readers can find them there.
Oh, yeah. Those are in Flylords. Okay. We'll get some links out. We'll check into the Flylords to those recipes. And then, so John Madden, you mentioned too. I mean, it sounds like you've connected with a lot of famous people, big names over your career. Is the New York Times, do you go back to that as a big reason for a lot of these? Well, I guess you can go back to Lampoon. It feels like throughout your whole career, you've really been in the spotlight. How is that? Has that been just lucky, or is that what you were going for from the start?
Well, you can start with journalists are very lucky because they get a free pass into so many worlds. And to people at a level of celebrity or renown that you normally wouldn't run into. I think every, career journalist I know, has their roster of famous people. I had a parallel career producing television with my brother and a lot of comedy specials. And as I said, we created the Mark Twain Prize. And then a few years later, we created the Gershwin Prize with the Library of Congress. And we did a number of shows on PBS with them, tribute shows, Paul McCartney, Carole King, Stevie Wonder, Paul Simon. So I guess I ran into my share of famous people. by and large, they're not the easiest folks to deal with. But if you recognize they're famous for a reason and defer to them, you'll get something good from them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. When working with Paul Simon or any of these other folks, John Madden, is it just kind of like you go in there working with them like they're just another person and you're kind of, learning from them and their specialty, or how have you been successful doing that?
Well, I have learned from everyone, but what you really want to do is get the most out of them and what they do in the way that connects with the audiences that know them. I mean, they all have a special gift. And so if you recognize that and create a situation, whatever it takes to make them feel comfortable and trust that you're going to present them at their best, or the best you can, you'll get something. It can be torturous. A lot of people are real perfectionists. And, by the time you get to take 100, you go, is this ever going to end? But the result can be good.
Yeah, this is awesome. So I just want to highlight too, Nick Lyons. We had him on the podcast back in episode 202, which was one of my favorites. Nick was one of those guys that did a bazillion things all at the same time, and it was amazing to hear his story. But it sounds like you're kind of on a similar line as Nick's. You did a lot in your career. One of the things, I guess, is the newest thing, your book that's out there, The Catch of a Lifetime. Do you want to give us a little kind of synopsis on that and tell folks what they can expect? I think you've probably had a bunch of these people or some famous writers in this book as well. Do you want to talk about that book?
Yeah. I never loved a book that I've done more than that. It came along during COVID. And, I wasn't doing a lot of traveling to fish. It's a real life raft. It kept me connected with the fly fishing world. And I will say that's where I discovered Flylords, and it was a real life raft. So I had done this book called Green Fires with Francis Mallmann. And it was the third book I'd done with him, and it gets harder as you go with a chef. You get the cream in the first book, and you get their greatest hits and then some. Anyway, I was on the phone with Leah Ronan, the publisher at Artisan and Workman, and I said, this book was a heavy lift. You owe me a me book. And I'm kind of full of myself. And they said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to write through Patagonia with fly rod and fork. And they said, well, we don't want to do that, but you fly fish, huh? People tend to see you, only the way they know you. I said, well, matter of fact, I do. So they said, we want to do this. We have this series, a man in his guitar, a man in his car, a man in his watch. We think that could really fit in with this series. And I said, well, yeah, but I think a man in his rod sounds, whatever.
Right.
And also, it doesn't include the biggest growth area in the sport, which is women. So luckily, or by happenstance, I came up with this idea, the catch of a lifetime. And I wrote to people, I wrote to Nick, I wrote to John McPhee, I wrote to people I knew, and then some I didn't. And then we can talk about that too, because that was very rewarding. And I said, here's what I want you to do. I don't want to know why fly fishing makes you, at one with the universe,
right?
Necessarily. Or the biggest fish you caught.
No.
I just want to know, if I say the word fly fishing, where do you go in your head? Tell me about that scene and tell me about an encounter with a fish. And I got a whole variety of things, and they're short pieces. I mean, Carl Hyacins, a few of them were longer, like 1,100, 1,200 words, but most of them are in the 500 to 700 word category. And like I said, it was lucky to come up with that formula, because people were able to follow it and give me a great variety of things. But also keeping them short, I think was really good, because when you read longer fishing stories, they all sort of start to sound the same. It's like reading long sex scenes. You really just want to get to the chase. So I think that was wonderful. And Artisan let me pick all the photographs. And I went to all the greats, known and unknown in the field, and that was terrific. Not surprisingly, my Times column had some reach. I wrote to people, took a flyer and wrote to folks, and apparently they knew my column. So I got McPhee I'd written about in the Times, Mark Kurlansky, Hyacinth, David James Duncan, Rachel Maddow. I read that she was a fly fisherman, and I know enough about showbiz that you don't go straight to them or to their production office. I knew she wrote a book. So I wrote to her literary agent, and I sent out a bunch of letters like that to some famous folks, and didn't think more about it. And I didn't hear back from Rachel's people. And then 2 months later, this great story, really crisp, really knowledgeable about catching a pike on a fly, comes in from Rachel Maddow. So it's great.
Wow.
There were also people not as widely known who really just came up with the goods. I read about a woman named Katie Kahn, Cahn, and she sort of gained a foothold on the fly fishing imagination. So I've seen her in some commercials. She's an ambassador for a lot of things, and she's a woman who she was a whitewater guide on the Chattooga, which has class everything rapids, and at some point she got cancer, and she wrote about or talked about how fly fishing helped her out of that. And I'm also a cancer survivor. We both had serious stuff. And so it really clicked with me. And I called her up, and we got a great story from her about how fly fishing touched her and continues to touch her. And she works a lot with the group for Casting with Recovery.
Yeah, they're big.
People, burdened with that disease.
Yeah.
So Katie did a good piece. There's a guy named Val Krapanuki. I never can pronounce it right. And he's got a website called VK Steelworks. V as in Victor, K Steelworks. And if you look at it on Instagram, he ties these amazing creations out of fly tying materials, but they're not flies. He creates sort of sculptures out of them, so to speak, feathers and fur. And they're just captivating. American Museum of Fly Fishing had an exhibit of his last year. And he also makes reels that are just these brutalist reels, the brutalist school of art. And they're also pretty amazing. And I guess I'd been working up in Maine on a cookbook, and driving back, I just dropped him a note and asked if I could come in and see him. He lives near Weston, Connecticut, if I remember right. Went and saw his house. Very cool workshop. He's a high school arts teacher, and he makes these things. Not really known as a writer. So together, through an interview and my editing and going back and forth with him, we came up with this piece. It's called Rain Blind. And I sent the manuscript to a few friends, Nick among them, Henry Hughes, a great writer, Steve Sautner, who wrote the Times column as well. And people said, wow, that rain blind story about the great blue heron. So when you get a response like that, you go, the universe is saying something to me. So I put that one first in the book, even though no one heard of this guy as a writer. I'm very happy with it. So that was a lovely one to come across. Another one I just thought that was spectacular. I love them all. I mean,
yeah, like right. You could probably say. And how many there were total? There were 70?
73. There was some through one person in X, this word got out there. I got in contact with a woman named Paige Wallace, and she's a photographer, a video maker, and she wrote a piece called May I Have This Dance? And it's so much the kind of a thing that I felt really came from a woman's perspective. And it was about, she likes to dance, do what's called swing dancing. And she compared dancing with a new partner with hooking into a great trout and the kind of subtle moves and counter moves you make. And it was really just terrific. And I sent it to Joan Wolfe, who also wrote a really terrific story. And Joan said, oh gosh, that is really wonderful. It's great to see women writing stuff like that. So I passed that to Paige, and it made her day as it made mine.
Right. This is good. Well, on this book, do you think if you compared, say, and I think about this sometimes on the podcast, having people that are kind of nobody's heard of or maybe not as well versus the famous people, how do you think this book would have done if it would have been basically a bunch of people that were kind of no-namers versus the famous people? Do you think if you would have had one or the other, it would have made the book a lot different, sold more copies? What are your thoughts there?
Well, it's too late to know what the sales are. I think they're going well. But you can really ride a manic roller coaster if you look at your Amazon thing every day.
Oh, yeah.
So I really don't. I think it helped get noticed, within the community.
Yeah.
Kirk D for Trout Unlimited, wrote the review of a lifetime, as far as I'm concerned. He called it a book for the ages. So I just don't know why people picked it up. I think once you're into it, I don't think the big names mean much to the reading more than the new discoveries do. But it's hard to say. And of course, the photographs are just terrific. Val Atkinson, Nick Price, Andy Anderson, Macalla Elliott. Just, it's a wonderful mix. Now, I was really careful. I didn't want to make it like a National Geographic article or a picture book where you just see the pictures and go past the stories. I wanted it to be a literary work. So I guess there are 70 photographs in it, something like that. So there are story after story and then a bunch of pictures. And I think it's a good balance. I think you want to read the stories rather than just look at the captions.
Yeah.
I hope.
Right, exactly. And you mentioned the Flylords. I think we've had Jared on the podcast as well. He's doing some really great stuff there. How did connecting with Flylords change, kind of your trajectory with what you had going?
During COVID, I discovered Flylords, and I just love the attitude. I love the range of things they covered. And so how did we get in touch? I don't know. Maybe I posted some things or they posted some things and we wrote to each other. And, it's a group that's of fly fishers who are considerably younger than I am. And it's really great. I have found that in cooking books and in fly fishing books. Every 5 years or so, there's just a new wave of people. And I've been able to connect to that through my work. And Jared and I really hit it off. I've done a number of things for them. I just worked with them on a new video series they're doing called Flavor on the Fly, where they, as a host, they have a fellow named Ranga Pereira, who's a private chef out in Bozeman. And we shot an episode in my backyard and on Jamaica Bay out by Kennedy Airport catching bluefish. So I'd say it's been one of those friendships spawned by the internet. That's been really cool.
Yeah. I think that's a great thing. It's like a mutual kind of, you guys are both kind of seeing benefits from it, right? I mean, Jared obviously is connecting, just like here, we're connecting with you. You're providing value for our listeners, and at the same time, Jared's getting the word out to you, maybe to some younger people who don't know about your stuff. And it kind of works both ways.
Absolutely. They've been really just terrific cheerleaders for my work. I like all the guys.
Yeah, that's right. And I don't know all the guys. I know I've met Jared and a couple of folks there, but no, we definitely, Flylords is, they're doing some good stuff. It's pretty good. So let's go down that cooking track a little bit there. So you've got also a number of books, right, in cooking. Can you give us, I don't want to copy what you're doing exactly at Flylords, but as far as some, some fish recipes, what do you tell somebody if they're thinking like, hey, I want to learn about, is there a book you point them to, or how do they get better at, some of these grilling recipes potentially?
For cooking fish, really easy, relatively fail-safe. I got to say that the book that I did called How to Dress an Egg with Ned Baldwin is just the best. For example, if you want to make a thick piece of fish, like a 2-inch fillet of cod or salmon, you boil, I think for 1.5 pounds, you cut it up like into 6-ounce portions, and you boil some water. You salt the fish, that tightens the flesh a little bit. You boil some water, like I think it's 2 or 3 quarts of water. When it comes to the boil, you turn it off, you put the fish in it, you leave it for 4 or 5 minutes, and you take it out. And it's flaky, moist, and done.
Wow.
Yeah, it's great.
That's it.
That's it. Whole deal. That's it. Always works like a charm. If you want to get, grill fish on cast iron, so it gets crispy skin, you dry the skin well. Again, I always salt before I put something on, because that helps the flesh absorb the salt. And you put it in oil, which, as Ned Baldwin, the chef I did the book with, says, the oil is more than a slick, less than a puddle. And you press it down with a spatula when you make that first contact, so it keeps it from curling. And that'll pretty much give you that crispy skin that restaurants get. Now, trick that I learned from a great French chef named Michel Richard, who I did a couple books with. If you really want to make it not stick and you're not too sure your technique, Wondra flour, that's granulated white flour. If you just press that outside skin in the Wondra and then put it in the hot oil and press it down, it has less stickability. Another just insanely great recipe that's really impressive, I did with Francis Mallmann in the book 7 Fires. I also wrote this up in the New York Times. It's for a whole striped bass encased in salt. And it's kind of a no-brainer. You take let me just say, we're not cooking striped bass these days because it's a fishery endangered, but a really big bluefish, a salmon, a weakfish or sea trout, a redfish. I've done it with redfish. Take a big sheet pan. If you need to cut the tail off the fish, do that. Just put some tinfoil around it. You put like a layer of wet salt, like when you're burying someone in sand in the beach, about 1 inch thick on the bottom of the sheet pan. Put the fish on top of it. Put some potatoes around it, maybe some carrots, and then cover it with moist sand like you're doing someone at the beach. Stick it in a really hot oven for 55 minutes. If it's a bigger fish, or you can stick a thermometer in it just like you would a roast. And you take it out and you crack open the salt crust, and it steams up, and then you just peel off the skin and, like with a pie server, you take off serving sizes. So it's really dramatic, and it could be Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas or Easter, because it's a big dramatic thing that can feed a lot of people, and it's different. So, like I said, you can find that in 7 Fires. You can find that in the New York Times, and I can send you a link for that.
Yeah, that'd be great. These are great tips. Perfect. And did you cover? It sounds like you covered a lot in the cooking. Did you? Can you give us maybe a tip or two on grilling a steak? How would you? Anything to come to mind there?
Well, 2 things. First, hanger steak. You can do it inside or outside. It's a really forgiving cut of meat, and it doesn't need a big charred crust on it. Again, that recipe is in How to Dress an Egg, and New York Magazine called it the best steak in New York. I'm always a little skeptical about the best pizza, the best bagel,
right.
the best, but it's really good. Now, grilling outside, I went to the Mercado del Puerto in Montevideo, Uruguay. which is where I was working on this book with Francis there in Patagonia in Argentina. And I probably tried 100 steaks. And I would come and I would say, someone make me a steak, like a strip steak, like an inch and a half thick, about a pound, which is the size I'm going to tell you about now, which I think is a pretty standard size. And they would make me a steak, and I would, you can't eat 100 steaks, even if you spread it out over time. I would take a bite. I would pay for the whole thing. I would cut off a piece, taste it, until I found the one that I liked. I would give the part that I hadn't cut off to, there was a couple of street musicians there, so they got a free steak lunch. So basically, you want to make the fire, you want to get it to so the coals are covered over with ash, and if you hold your hand over it, if you go 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3, that's the way I say it. So however long that took, and if you hold your hand 4 inches above the grill,
that's it. That's
about the right temperature. We wrote this up in the Times too, and it's about the right temperature to cook at. It'll allow the outside to get a crust on a char on it, and the inside to grill evenly, so you get that wall-to-wall pink. That's how I like it, medium rare.
Mm-hmm.
And it was 9 minutes on the initial side, 7 minutes on the other side. I mean, that's a lot slower than your average person will make it, but that's going to work.
Yeah,
I've done it many times.
That'll work. And are you still? Do you still enjoy? Are you in the kitchen, out the cooking a lot? Is that still something you like doing?
Yeah, I love cooking and I love fishing. It's no coincidence that I like those two things together. I mean, both cooking and fishing stem from a basic drive to find food. Even if you catch and release, the thrill of catching a fish is the thrill of a person 5,000 years ago bringing home dinner. We release fish because we can. You can't release a deer that you shot. But I do love cooking. This is just me speaking personally. I find that when I fish or when I cook, I'm not aware of the passage of time. It's like having a dream. You wake up from it and you're back to real life, but you can be cooking for hours or fishing for hours, and you're just locked into another way of perceiving the world.
Right.
And that's a gift. Now, you might like that being a marathon runner. You might like that bicycling.
Mm-hmm.
You might golfing. If you can find anything in your life that just gives you some relief from the tick-tock of daily life, I think you're very fortunate. And fishing and food have done that for me.
Right. And that's a great point. I was just thinking the same thing. I think, podcasting for me, that's kind of, my thing. And I think a lot of times we have guests that come on and they feel the same way. So that's a great point. What do you think with your writing? You've written a lot of different things over the years. What is the hardest thing for you to write? Is it harder to write a cookbook or a fishing book or article, or is it all kind of similar work?
Well, writing the Times column just became really easy for me. It's like writing 30-second commercials. I had this metronome in my head, and I know what 900 words feels like. And I know you can only introduce one or at most two characters in a story that the reader can not be confused by. They're new people to them. I write things in the first person. In other words, the person that you're reading says, I went fishing, or, I motored up the bank or something. But you try and make that I to be everybody. So they see things as if they were seeing them themselves through your eyes. And a great, great, great piece of writing advice was, I was reading the letters of Raymond Chandler, great mystery writer. He wrote The Long Goodbye. Sam Spade was his character. Humphrey Bogart played in a lot of the movies. And it was in the end of the 40s. And not Sam Spade. Was Sam Spade his? Might have been, but Philip Marlowe was a famous character. And in the end of the 40s, Pall Mall, the cigarettes, Pall Mall, decided to do a radio show, and he didn't want to write it, but he wanted the money. So they hired two writers, and he said, here's the thing. If you're writing it with the I character, the first person, never give the I character the last word. Because readers know you're doing that, and they think you have control of what they're reading, and you're putting your thumb on the scale to make yourself look like the real smartass. So you can say clever things, although you shouldn't try to only say. You should just tell the story. But you can say clever things, but as long as you don't give yourself the topper, people will stay with you.
Yeah. What would be an example of that? Does anything come to mind where you followed that advice, or a story?
Well, I have to think about it. Pretty much.
I'm thinking just the basic example is like you're telling a story. I went fishing for rainbow trout, and I caught the biggest fish in my life. And instead of doing that, you would say I went fishing for rainbow trout, and bring in some other ending where you're not finishing with your story. You're talking about somebody else, another character. You're ending it on that.
Yeah, another character could be the fish.
All right, could be the fish. Yeah, and the fish leaped and amazingly broke me off and lived to fight another day.
Exactly. I wrote many stories in the Times and in the Big Three about a fellow named Jack Bass Allen. And I fished with him for 40 years in the Everglades, the Sweetwater Everglades, south of Okeechobee, for largemouth bass in a canoe, or a little old, just no frills John boat, back on the Miccosukee Reservation. And people don't do that. They're all going for bonefish and tarpon. And we pretty much had it to ourselves. And I loved that guy. He died a few years ago. But any of my stories about Jack Allen, if you look up Peter Kaminsky, Jack Allen in New York Times, he's there. He's also in a lot of my books.
Perfect. And Bass was his original, that was his actual middle name?
No, that was how you can find him in the phone book.
Okay. Perfect. So Jack Allen and Peter Kaminsky. We'll be looking up, doing a lot of research as we're going here.
He was a good friend of Dave Whitlock.
Mm-hmm.
Him and Lefty Cray used to fish the Juniata, a trib of the Susquehanna in Pennsylvania, and they also used to go to Maine, just like around spawning season. I think around spawning season, right after black flies.
Nice. Well, Peter, I want to start to take it out of here, and we have this little section we call our, kind of our author shout out, and I want to get an author that's maybe influenced you over your time. But this one today is presented by the Virginia Fly Fishing and Wine Festival. Bo has got these great shows in Virginia and Texas, and we're trying to get people that are in that region to head out to Virginia. So for those listening, if you haven't grabbed your ticket yet, head out and check that out. But give me your, I've talked to a number of writers over the years and heard many influence. You've talked about some of the people that have influenced them, Nick Lyons and others. Is there a writer that really sticks out to you and you think like, hey, that person was either early in your career or during, was a big influence for you?
Among my influences, Nick Lyons certainly ranks near the top. His writing really involved you. Was never chest thumping or bragging, and it is very clear. You know exactly where you are and what you're doing with Nick. A.J. McLean, Al McLean, who I got to know in his later years, I just felt his writing, again, cut to the bone and drew you in and you wanted to be there. Of course, Hemingway.
Yeah.
The simplicity of Hemingway. And I got to go to Cuba with his son, Jack, who was a great fly fisherman, and his granddaughter, Margot, to make a film about Papa. So I had great experiences learning about this crazy guy's life. But the way he writes, you just can't hold a candle to it. It's just, he gets you there. So yeah, I really like these guys. I love Raymond Chandler, not a fishing writer, a mystery writer, but I sort of like his wise guy and self-deprecating way of writing. Turgenev, Hemingway loved Turgenev. I love Turgenev, the Russian writer, most famous, Sons.
Yep.
But he also wrote a book called A Sportsman's Sketches, or A Sportsman's Notebook. And that's about a guy who's kind of a small game hunter, who makes his way from estate to estate and village to village and writes about it. And it's not about fishing, but the way he writes about this blood sport and the people that he meets and the lives they lead, that had a big influence on me.
Well, yeah, that's a good list. I go back to thinking about Hemingway. We had an episode recently, episode 513, and it was the life and works of Ernest Hemingway. Mark Cirino has a podcast, the One True podcast, and he broke down a lot of the stories from Hemingway, and he talked about that writing, how Hemingway kind of let you, he kept it simple so you can kind of decide or figure it out for yourself. Is that something that you tried to do in some of your writing? Did you think about that, or did that come naturally?
Well, first of all, let me say, maybe tell him about me and I can do a show with him. I have a lot of Papa Hemingway stories that people have never heard.
Good.
But Mark Twain said the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between the lightning bug and the lightning. And I think what Hemingway was able to do, he was able to leave out everything but the really right word. And that right word was so right, it made you see the whole scene. There are kinetic words that just attract our imaginations and take us to places without the author having to fill in, the white space.
Wow. Yeah, that's it. Nice. And I have a few more, Peter, kind of random. We like to go in a little random mix as we head out of here and some questions. But I mentioned that the Virginia Festival do you ever, over your time, were you ever going to local events, local fly fishing festivals? Did you ever do any of that, trying to sell books, things like that?
Not a ton of it. I should have done more.
Yeah.
I will say the thing I've written about that I think gets overlooked, and certainly you can do it in the Southeast, but you can do it in the Midwest and you can do it in the Northeast, is bass fishing on a fly rod. I've done it at the golf course near where my parents used to live in Florida, during COVID, a little lake in Connecticut. And it's not crowded like trout streams. They're wonderful fish. And bass fishing has taken me to places in America that, like, a New York guy wouldn't normally find himself. And that's certainly true I've had so many adventures in the South that, I never would have done otherwise.
Then you're talking about mainly smallmouth bass.
No, both.
Oh, both. Yeah.
Jack Allen and I fished for largemouth. I fished for smallmouth all through the Ozarks, and that's a whole other trip. It's just wonderful and timeless and hypnotic and beautiful. And just people who go bass fishing in the Ozarks, by and large, go to the big impoundments with their bass boats and fish for largemouth. But those smallmouth streams are just gorgeous.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, bass is always a top speed. Obviously fly fishing, a lot of people think trout, especially getting into it. But you've probably seen this too, the amazing thing about how it's evolved, and now you can catch almost anything on a fly rod. But I think smallmouth and largemouth are definitely top species for a lot of people. So what do we talked recipes, we talked some different things here. So let's just go down that track with the recipe. You've got one meal you're going to make during the week or during the month. What is that thing? What's the thing you really love?
Okay, well, this is going back to one that I mentioned. If you want to have a really beautiful, moist, perfectly done fish, poaching it in water that's boiled, and the recipe is in How to Dress an Egg. It's also on Flylords. That's going to work every time. Then you can decide what you want to do with it. You can make a green goddess dressing, and I have that in the book. You can just put some olive oil, flaky salt, and black pepper on it. That doesn't hurt. There's a Spanish thing called romesco that's kind of made with sherry vinegar and peppers, bell peppers, and almonds ground up. Take your choice. But I just find the plain old poached fish, poached for 4 or 5 minutes and lashed with some olive oil, really works well. You can make a fillet in a pan with a lot of butter and you just keep spooning the butter over the side that's not on the pan. And that's a classic restaurant technique. It's hard to do for like more than two people. But that's a good way. I just think the poached fish is just the way to go.
Poached fish. It seems like I've always think about the butter, is that like, who doesn't love a lot of butter? Do you feel like in restaurants that's a key to a lot of these? Do you think people, when you go out and eat, they're just piling a bunch of butter on there? Or I guess it depends on where you go, but what's your take on the butter question?
Butter's great.
Yeah.
Better with butter.
Yeah.
It's also bacon. Olive oil is wonderful too. I didn't mention that fish grill up well. It has to be, the fish has to be dry and then oiled if you're going to grill it. Otherwise, it's going to stick. Tell you the truth, though, if it sticks, don't worry about it. You're not in a beauty contest. You just want to cook the fish through.
Yep.
And they grill up well. Whole fish, like in a grill basket, can be really beautiful. You know, you put some slits in it and stick. I like with whiting or, you know, mackerel, smaller fish, bluefish, putting slits in the fish. You know, you gut it, scale it, and sticking some tarragon and a lemon peel, lemon wedge in the slits. That really grills up well too. And I've written about that, and I can send you some recipes.
Okay.
When you go all through this, you know, you'll have some TKs. You want some recipes from me, just write me, and then I'll know what to look for and send to you.
Okay. Yeah. And where's give people an email? Is that okay if people like reach out to you by email?
I think it's best if what do you think?
If you're on Instagram, I think social will be fine too. That'd be probably be easier because we don't want to, you know, flood too much there.
So my Instagram is Peter Kaminsky 1. So that's PETERKA, M as in Michael, IN as in Nancy, SKY, the number 1. That's it.
Perfect. And we'll have a link to that as well. So, and we talked about a number of famous people. I mean, and lots I know we haven't talked about. I think Tom Brokaw, maybe you had a connection with there as well. But when you think about maybe can you give us one story? I mean, this is kind of putting you on the spot. Any over the time, one story that comes to mind of some famous person you knew and a story of you either fishing or just in life in general. I'll let you think about that for a sec as I give you the next question, unless you have something on the tip of your tongue.
Well, showbiz people, we've talked fishing.
Yep.
But I haven't seen that much. You know, Robert Redford was on a show that I did. We talked about fishing out in Utah and Montana. John Candy, who I worked with a lot.
Mm-hmm.
We used to talk fishing a bunch. Jimmy Kimmel. If you ask me, I'm trying to remember if I ever fished with anybody famous. Well, Margot Hemingway, we used to fish. But perhaps the renowned person who I fished with that really stands out so clearly in my mind was Lee Wolf. I met Lee Wolf a few years before he died. I was writing about him for Sporting Classics. I spent a week with him and Joan up in Lou Beach. We flew around the Beaverkill in his plane. I saw all his films he'd done over the years. And Lee Wolf and I went fishing on Wagon Tracks, a very famous pool on the Beaverkill, not far from where the Hendrickson was invented. And we caught a bunch of fish. And then we just had done it and we're taking a break and we put our rods down and we were sitting on the bank and we started to pick up stones, sort of flat stones, and skip them across the stream as you do when you're a youngster. And we just had a blast. And I just, out of nowhere, Lee, talking about fishing, said, "This wonderful sport." And he gave me a box of flies that I still have, of course, that he had tied. So I guess to me, that's the real touch with greatness and celebrity that I've had in fishing. Other famous people are just like me or you. They're just folks who fish. And I guess you're aware of their stars. But, I fished with Jimmy Buffett. We went to Cuba.
Oh, there you go.
Okay. So I was making a film about Ernest Hemingway. And I knew that Jimmy had written a song, an album, Havana Daydreaming. So I was in Key West and I chartered a clipper ship to go down to Havana through a mutual friend, I got in touch with Jimmy, and I said, well, if you'd like to pilot a clipper ship into Havana Harbor, now's your chance. And so we did that. And then we fished with Hemingway's boat captain, Gregorio Fuentes, for marlin right off of Havana. And Jimmy did that with us for a few days. So that's my famousest person story. And he was a really good guy to fish with.
That's pretty amazing. And do you, with all the years when you look back, do you ever kind of pinch yourself and say, wow, this, like, all the connections and people, and think, like, you know, how did this happen? Or do you feel like you put in a lot of work and you're not surprised?
I honestly don't know. I just know that both fishing and being a journalist just gives you a pass into a world, you know, you would not otherwise have been in. And just like with writing with chefs, when I write about great anglers, I'm writing about them, so they know I'm not competing with them. I want to learn with them. And so if you're not going one-on-one to catch fish with Al Cucci or Lee Wolf, and you're just there to hear what they have to say, well, people do like to talk about themselves anyway, but you know, they're just free with it. They're not in competition with you.
Yeah, that's right. Nice. Well, I think we will. I guess the big question here is, you do have a lot of books in all these topics we talked about. Where is the best place if people want to track down kind of all the work you've done? Is there one place they can go to, or what's your recommendation?
Well, of course, Amazon has a lot of them. Some of them are out of print, but you can still get them.
Okay.
Barnes and Noble has a lot. Bookshop.org. It's independent booksellers. You can find them through all of them. Your local bookstore can order the stuff that's in print. I'm hopeful that the new book, The Catch of a Lifetime, I'm hopeful that independent fly shops will offer it. I'm trying to work out a discounted deal for them. I think it'd be really cool if fly shops made a couple of dollars on it. Yeah,
that's awesome. And do you want to leave us with your catch of a lifetime story here? Do you have something that I'm not sure if, I'm sure you have a few. Maybe you've already talked about it today.
No, I haven't. Well, like I said, what I asked people to do was hear the words fly fishing and write about the encounter that comes to mind first. So it wasn't a 26-pound sea run trout on a size 12 Prince nymph in Patagonia. It wasn't an 11-pound bonefish on Christmas Island. I go back to a morning on the Esopus Creek in the Catskills. And it was quite early one morning, and I went to the local bait shop and got myself a cup of coffee, a pack of Marlboros, and a Clark bar. And I bushwhacked about a quarter of a mile through this berry tangle. It was late spring, to a pool that I knew on the Esopus that had a big glide at the tail out. Eased myself into the stream and got about a third of the way across the stream. And then there was a few rising fish going up the bank that I'd come in from. And I believe it was an Au Sable wolf down. And, the mist was just lifting off the water, and fish took it. 12, 13 inches. I've certainly caught bigger trout. It was a plump 12 or 15 inches. And the way he just came up and got tight on it, that's all the magic of the sport. Wow. At the time you get in that zone spiritually, you're doing fine.
Yeah, there's something about it. And we're working on a Catskills event. Hopefully this next year we're going to be probably focusing on something around dry fly fishing. But what is it for you about the Catskills? I mean, it sounds like that's kind of been your world. You know that well. What is it about the Catskills that makes it so? I mean, I know there's a lot of history there, but other than the history, just the area, the natural area, what makes it so unique? Or is it not that much different than, say, the Henry's Fork or some other place where there's a great dry fly fishing?
Well, for dry fly, the east and west branch of the Delaware, there's no place that I've ever been that has more consistent hatches all through the season. And there's no place where the fish are more challenging. If you can catch them on the west branch, you can catch them on Henry's Fork, You can catch them on the Missouri. You can catch them on the Test or the Itchen. It really is, an advanced graduate course in dry fly presentation. The Esopus was where I learned to fish. That's where Lee Wolf invented the Wolf series. Started it there with Dan Bailey, and Dan finished out the series of ties. And I had rented a cabin up there, and it was great. They had the classic progression of mayfly hatches, like Art Flick wrote about in a guide. That's another book. Just put it on your list. It's so clear and simple.
Yeah. Art Flick, remind us again, that's Art Flick's book. What was the title?
The Streamside Guide.
Yep, that's it.
And so it's just beautiful. The Catskills are not real mountains, geologically speaking. They're eroded high plateaus, just like the Grand Canyon, although they've been eroding for some millions of years more, which gives them a rounded shape. But you can look from mountain to mountain and see those kind of horizontal lines running across, the tree growth. So they have their own beauty to them. It's what the Catskill School of Painting, Bierstadt and Cole, that's really the beginning of American, big landscape painting, later about Yosemite and all. But it's very, very beautiful. It's a dependable cold water fishery, although with global warming, we may be catching Dorado there soon.
Right.
But it's productive. It's within 3 hours of my house. It's beautiful. But I will say, in the last 15, 20 years, saltwater fly fishing, even in Brooklyn, I'm going tomorrow, it's just insane in the spring and the fall. Yeah. Stripers, albies, bluefish. It's an incredible fishery.
Yeah, I hear you. No, I think you guys are the more, and we're heading to New York. That's a great thing as you're talking about that. We're heading to New York in December to go for steelhead in the South Shore Lake Erie. So like New York, the more you get into it, the more you realize New York it's got, the greatest city in the planet, right? But it also has this great fishing and diversity of opportunities. So nice, Peter. Well, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, the thing about New York is there is great diversity of wildlife, at the foot of my street. I mean, there's all the game fish, there's dolphins, there's whales, there's seals, there's, endless convoys of waterfowl, there's monarch butterflies. I mean, we pretty much, shot out everything on land, but it's a real, Serengeti sampler in our coastal waters, and it always shocks people.
Yeah. What part of New York are you in?
I live in Brooklyn.
Yeah, in Brooklyn.
I have caught blues, stripers, blackfish, weakfish, 2 blocks from my house, right on the waterfront.
Yeah. Wow. Are you a baseball fan or sports?
I am a baseball fan.
Yeah. What is, I'm just team wise? I mean, obviously New York's famous. Are you a Mets or are you a Yankees fan?
I'm a lifelong Yankees fan. I kind of washed my hands of them this year. When the Mets are doing well, I like that. I'm the same with the Giants and the Jets.
Yeah.
I guess I'm more of a Knicks fan, and the jury's still out on the Nets.
The Nets, right.
That's about it.
That's it? No hockey for you or anything like that?
I'm not a hockey guy. I don't know why. I never I have friends who love but it never grabbed me.
Yeah, me neither. I actually went to a hockey game recently up in Seattle and watched. It was really awesome. It's just like anything. I think in person, it's always better. But good. So, okay, Peter. Well, I think we'll leave this some more stories maybe for the next time we can get you on here. And for now, we'll just leave everybody with Peter Kaminsky 1 on Instagram if they want to connect with you, see what else you have going. And just want to say thanks for all the time today and all the great work over the years. We definitely will be following up with you and digging more into your stuff. So until we meet again, thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Dave. It's been a pleasure.
That is a wrap. You can grab all of the show notes at wetflyswing.com. And please follow us on Instagram and share this episode out with someone you love. Please send me an email, dave@wetflyswing.com, if you have any feedback or want us to put together an episode on this podcast for you. Check in anytime. I hope you enjoyed this podcast and would love to meet up with you on the water. We have new fly fishing schools going all year long and all around the country. So if you want to connect, let's do it right now. All right, time to get out of here. I hope you have a great evening. I hope you have a great morning or great afternoon wherever in the world you are. And I appreciate you for stopping by and checking out the show today. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.